Welcome to Before the Work Begins with me, Jo Hutton, senior yoga teacher and author of best-selling Substack Yoga for Tired People. And in this podcast, we speak to the movers, the shakers and the creatives and find out what they are doing before the work begins. Are they really getting up at 5 a.m. and taking cold plunges, or are they just trying to get by like the rest of us? I hope you enjoy. Welcome to Before the Work Begins, and I am personally so excited about today's guest. It is the absolutely amazing Clover Stroud. Hello, Clover.
Hi, Jo. That's so nice. What a lovely thing to hear this morning. It's very nice. Thank you.
Tell us, for people who may not know what you do and the background of your work, is it possible for you to give us a little distilled background on what you do, Clover?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm a writer and I write very confessionally and very openly and with a great deal of kind of heart and emotion, I suppose, about the way life feels. And I have been a journalist for many years. I'm working on my 5th book. Each of those books are memoirs, and I take a kind of subject like motherhood or grief or home. What I'm writing about at the moment is about marriage, midlife, lust and longing. And I kind of write about my feelings, my experience through the prism of that subject. And I also write weekly on Substack, where I post about things that I'm interested by, things that I'm feeling, things that have bothered me. And it's called The Way Life Feels, because that's what I'm really fascinated by, is like, what is it that we're feeling? What are you feeling, Jo, right here in this moment? And how do I convey it? Because I think we're often all feeling the same thing or similar things. And it helps so much when we can share that.
It's lovely as well, because what you have done on Substack is you've managed to create such a beautiful community. I think that there's a lot of like the Substack audience is very writer heavy as well. And I feel like you almost tread this beautiful line of not only talking about your life, but also you pull the curtain back a little bit so people can see what it's like to document your life at the same time, which I think is beautiful.
Yeah, I mean, I started out documenting my life, and I didn't sort of set out to do that, but I started out as a journalist when I was 24 and I had a baby, and I sort of started writing articles about things that I was doing. And it wasn't always, there was also book reviews and interviews and various things. But I did find that the articles that I wrote most confessionally about stuff that I'd been through were the ones that had the biggest kind of reaction, I suppose. And by the time I was 27, I'd had a 2nd child, and I was then a single mother. And I wrote about that experience of leaving a marriage and being a single mother and supporting these kids on my own. And then I got remarried in my 30s and had another 3 children. So I've written a lot about motherhood and what motherhood feels like. But I'm also really fascinated by the creative life and, the life that the big emotional stuff that we're all going through and we're all living, but we all often want to kind of keep hidden from other people. So I love it what you've just said about pulling the curtain back, because that's what I'm always trying to do, is to sort of say to the listener or the reader, this is what I'm feeling. Are you feeling this as well? And often they do. And one of the things I love about Substack and social media actually is that you can have that interaction with people who say, I read your book about grief, like my sister died, so I wrote about a book about the experience of grief, or I read about the way that you write about motherhood, and it's made me feel as though my own experience is more valid, more real, is more seen. That's why I do write, to share our human experiences, because I think we can also feel very alone, and the more that we share, the easier this weird experience of being a human being is.
And do you think there's been much change since you started writing about your life? Do you think there's been a cultural shift? Because I know when I look back in the world, it was quite seen as lowbrow, or like it was almost seen like a gossip Maggie to talk about it, like there was like, and obviously this isn't what I think, but it was kind of seen like there was real proper art and then there was women talking about themselves. Do you think there's been a shift in that?
I think there's been a massive shift, and I think, I mean, as a journalist, so I started writing in the year 2000. So through the 2000s, I was writing for like the Sunday Times, the Mail, the Guardian. I was a freelance journalist supporting two kids on my own, so I was writing for everybody really. And those articles were there, what it's like to leave my marriage, or what it's like to deal with addiction, but there wasn't so many of them, I suppose. And then when social media happened, more people started sharing. And when I wrote a book called My Wild and Sleepless Nights, which is about motherhood, and I wrote it because my teenage son was kind of careering into adolescence, and my newborn baby, who was my fifth baby, had been born. So I had like an adolescent and a newborn baby. So I was holding them both at the same time, as it were, with another three children in between. And I really wanted to write about the extremities of that experience and what it truly felt like. And that was in about 2019 that I wrote that book. And 2020. And what was interesting when I look back is that the reason I wrote that book is there weren't that many other books about the sort of extremities of motherhood and what it really feels like. There was a book by Rachel Cusk called A Life's Work, which had been published in like round about 2000, so many, many years before. But there weren't, and that was one of the reasons I wrote that book. I'm not saying it was the only one. Of course, there were others, but there have been many, many since then. And I think that there is more of an understanding and a hunger and an appetite as well for the kind of minutiae of our daily lives and an interest in it. And definitely that is now seen as a more credible art form. And I know one of the things that I do with my writing is really accessible. Like anybody could read it. It's not complex. It's not challenging. It's not difficult. But at the same time, I do think really, really deeply about the art of my writing and how I'm, communicating something, how I'm communicating an emotion. And I want that emotion to be really clear to the reader, that complicated human feeling that I'm having. I want that to be really, really clear and beautiful to the reader, even if it's beautiful, even when it's describing postnatal depression or, something quite scary or grief, like the book that I wrote about grief called The Red in My Blood, about the year after my sister died, is a very beautiful book, but it also goes into the absolute sort of pain and darkness. So yes, I do think that there has been a shift. And then, Substack has shifted that again. And I love the fact that it's so democratic. If you want to write, there is a platform to write on. It doesn't depend on knowing a certain editor or having links to a certain newspaper. If you've got the energy, if you've got the appetite to do it, then you can. There's the platform where you can make it happen. And I think that's a really brilliant thing. I totally applaud it.
The publishing world depends entirely on comps, doesn't it? So if you have to be able to say this already works, and Substack you're able to prove that without having to have the gatekeeper. Do you feel like when you were taking things to publishers in 2000, you were having to trailblaze a little bit, or did people get you?
It's a really good question. To be honest with you, I did feel like people got me immediately, and maybe it's because I was very, very open, and I wasn't trying to do it in a contrived way, or wasn't trying to do it in an emotionally manipulative way. I just wrote about what I was experiencing. And one of the first very confessional pieces I wrote was around about 2004, or 2003 thereabouts, when I had left my first marriage. My first husband was an alcoholic, and we had split up because of that addiction. And I wrote an article, actually under a different name, but a very, very confessional, very open article about the experience of leaving a marriage with two young children because of somebody else's addiction. And I didn't do it under my own name at that stage, because I thought, well, I didn't feel confident enough to do that. And actually that article had a ton of reaction to it. And back then I don't even know if people were emailing in so much as writing letters. There weren't like comment boards under articles, but it had a big reaction. And many women saying, oh, it's such a relief to read about your experience and know that I'm not alone and there's nothing to be ashamed of, and you've emboldened me, you've made me feel better. And that sort of, at that point, I thought, well, no, I don't have to be ashamed of this. I can write more openly. So then I over years, I started sort of writing more and more openly. But when I wrote My Wild and Sleepless Nights about motherhood, and I was writing that around about 2016, 2017, I did feel some of this is quite risky. Like, I'm being very, very open about my feelings around postnatal depression, maternal ambivalence, the pain, the boredom, the frustration of motherhood. And I did used to sometimes send bits or ideas to people that I knew on Instagram, but who I'd never met before. But like, people who I followed them, they followed me, saying, is this something that you might have felt as well? Does this sound too extreme? Like, if I talk about this kind of violence of motherhood, and it was really useful and helpful being able to talk to other people and them saying, no, that's exactly me too, that's how I feel. So I think it was at that point around when I started going more into memoir writing and bigger, longer form writing that I felt it was very creatively satisfying being able to have control, much more control than just writing an article for a newspaper. And also, actually, one of the things I love about Substack is that I now have control over, I can write anything that I want there, and I haven't got an editor or anybody saying, oh, can you take out that bit of poetry you put in there or something like that. I love that feeling.
I love what you're saying about it being simple, because it is, and accessible, because I feel like you do manage to distill those feelings down into a very ready to understand way, and it's beautiful, but there's a bravery in it as well. What do you think that bravery comes from?
I think the bravery comes from the feeling, the absolute certain knowledge that what I'm experiencing is what you're experiencing and what people listening to this are experiencing as well. And I don't feel any shame around talking about desires or failings or fears, because I know that that's what other people are experiencing. And I think the root of this audacity, this bravery, comes from what happened. My mum had a massive accident when I was 16. Up until then, I'd had a very stable, loving childhood. I was very deeply loved as a childhood. And that probably I was very lucky to have that, very privileged to have that love as a child. But mum then had this horrific accident when I was 16 that left her profoundly brain damaged. She was in a coma for several months. And when she woke up, she was a completely different person, and she was very, very physically and mentally disabled. And she lived in that state for 22 years. So I was in this kind of grief-struck, basically fairly traumatized state for 22 years. And I think, because I've often thought about this, why do I talk so much about emotion? And I think it's because I was kind of held in a place of high emotion. And because mum, in a way, if she'd died, there would have been like a natural grieving process and a natural movement that happens forward. But there wasn't. We were stuck in this place of a sort of living death, or, a deathly life of her being this strange shadow of the person she had been. She couldn't walk, she couldn't talk, she had so many terrible, terrible health issues. And I think that sort of made me think really deeply about emotion and made me quite fearless, because I was living through something that felt really awful. It was almost as though the worst thing that I could imagine was happening every single day without ending. I was very, very close to my mum. I really, really loved her deeply. And it really shocked me the other day. I was talking to my brother, and we were saying, like, she would be 9, she'd be in her 9, mum could still be alive now. I find that really, I was 60, I'm 50 now. I was 16 when the accident happened. It was like 1991. And she died in 2013, but she could even, some people's parents are still alive in their 90s. She could still be alive. So, but I think I've thought really, really deeply about feeling and pain and longing and sadness and joy. And that gives me a kind of desire to share it as well. And also to share it because of the pain that I've been through. There has to be something gained from this pain. There has to be some kind of, personal evolution. And I think that if my personal evolution can be an ability to share stuff that might be considered shameful or secret or private with other people, and make them feel less ashamed and make myself feel less ashamed at the same time, then that is some kind of human growth that has come and something positive that's come from this really, really terribly, terribly sad and tragic thing that happened to Mum.
And do you see your writing as work, or do you see it as a calling or something that you just have to do?
Yeah, I think I do feel it's something that I have to do. I really want to be read. I really, really mind deeply about the reader. I love my relationship with the reader. And we were talking earlier about Instagram and how addictive it is. And sometimes I think, oh, I'm going to come off Instagram because of that addiction to it. But I love and I really value as well the conversations I have with just completely normal people like me on through social media. And I love the knowledge that I'm helping people. So I do feel, and people have said to me, your writing is really, really essential to me. I need to read your writing. And obviously I have I'm insecure and unsure of myself, just as we all are. And I want to hear that my writing matters to people. And so when someone sends me a message saying, it really helped me deal with postnatal depression, it really helped me deal with my brother's death, that's when I feel like, oh, there is a kind of calling element. And I definitely have to write. I mean, I'm always thinking about how I'm going to express and how I'm going to write about this feeling that I'm having right now. And I love that. And there is an urgency to it. And I love the thing of Substack, of, weekly being able to share an idea. And the amount of comments I have there, people say, oh, that's exactly what I was thinking about this week. It's such a nice feeling because we're in it together.
There's an energy in it, isn't there? There's like a live energy, and I don't know how exactly to put it into words, but it feels like magic or alchemy, where you put it out there live, and then someone at the other side of the world comments back, and it feels like you're creating sorcery together.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm sure that there's like a process of osmosis, that when I write about stuff and I have ideas and I write about stuff, then it can, if you read it, will go into your head. But I'm certain that your stuff, your emotions, your pain, your desires goes into my head in some way or another as well, even if we haven't actually spoken. But there's a sort of shared sense of consciousness. I don't know what this is. I have no words truly to describe what that is, but it is like I guess it's humanity, really. It's a shared sense of our humanity, isn't it? One of the things that I've been doing is this little group called Be More Human, where I started making crafts. I'm not very good at crafts. In fact, 2 months ago, I'd say I can't sew at all. But I thought at the beginning of the year, oh, every month I'm just going to try and make something. So I made this little felt mouse. And then I thought, well, it'd be quite nice to have some other people involved with this as well. So I'll just do something on Substack, see if anybody wants to come. And I have this once a month, we meet up, whoever wants to join, and you share something that you've done creatively. Last month, I was doing like embroidery, and somebody was learning some guitar, somebody was making little books. And it's just like a way to try and use technology, which is part of all of our lives, to feel connected to other people, to encourage more people to do stuff with their hands, and sort of push against the sort of relentless feeling of AI. Because some people talk about AI, don't they, as though we're already redundant. I find that really interesting. People would sort of talk about as though AI is already taken over, and actually the extraordinary beauty of human beings, I don't think it will be able to be replaced, but we have to do what we can to push against it as well. And then in the little, in the little things that we can all do matter and are important.
And almost the opposite of AI is, I'm desperate to know this about your relationship to horses.
Yeah.
Because I think I think about this a lot, because I've never had horses, but I'm very, very drawn to them. And I often think about the fact that we as humans have evolved with horses. We've evolved together to understand each other and to be able to like communicate with each other. I know that you've got a real relationship with horses. Do you think that's in any way connected to your deep feeling?
That's such a beautiful question. I grew up with ponies. Like, we lived in Wiltshire. It was kind of muddy, and me and my sister used to like have these little ponies out in the field. It wasn't a kind of smart show jumping type of life. It was just very much ponies out in the mud. And so I grew up with that, and they were really important to me. And Mum's accident was on a horse. So a horse destroyed her life, kind of destroyed my life. But I never moved away from horses. I always moved closer to them as the sort of, and I think that in a way was looking right at this traumatic thing that had happened to me and wanting to kind of own it in some, not own it, but like to be as close to it as possible rather than retreat in fear away from it. But like, so I ended up going and doing some fairly big things around horses. And my first book, The Wild Other, is partly about Mum's accident and then about different journeys I took into horse worlds. I went and lived in Texas and worked on rodeos. I spent a lot of time in Russia, like riding horses in the mountains there, and different ways of processing traumatic event. And so for me, horses have always been really linked to deep emotion. And on a podcast, I was once asked it was called The Sacred. And I was asked, what is sacred to you? And I said, like, horses are sacred to me. That feeling of standing beside a horse in a field and the power of a horse and this extraordinary sense that they are these animals who are way stronger than us, way wilder than us, way bigger, way more powerful, way more energetic. Yet they allow us to, I don't want to use the word master because they've still got way more than we have, but they allow us into a very close relationship with them in a way that no other, maybe dogs do, but few other animals do in that very, very close way. And the kind of power of a horse is something extraordinary. So yes, I do think that horses are part of, and because they're linked so closely to my childhood and my relationship with my mum and my memories of my mum, and my sister Nell, we grew up together, we rode ponies together, we were very much like bound together through horses, and then she died as well in 2019. So horses have become this like symbol of my mum and my sister. I moved to America in 2023, just for a few years. I'm moving back to England this summer for my husband's job, and I've been away from horses during that time. I'm living in a city, I don't have horses in my life in the same way. And I do feel like something profound is lacking. And it's not really about ownership of horses. It's just like being close to that source of something extraordinary. It's beyond ordinary. They are extra, these animals.
Because they communicate the human and horse relationship is like almost entirely emotional. It's like you can communicate on this, like it's almost this extra level of communion that's beyond language, but very in sync.
Yeah.
And that feels like something that you in your writing often portray, or like this deep well of feeling that is almost intangible, but in everything.
Yeah, and I think that we are all experiencing, you've just described it really, really well, the sort of intangible but huge emotions that we are experiencing. And one of the things that I love about writing is that it enables me to really, the long form writing that I do, the book writing, really, really enables me to go deep into a feeling and analyze it and look at it from every angle and try and find the ideal, quite often quite slightly strange image or metaphor that I might use as a vehicle for that emotion. And one of the things that I love is when people say to me, you've expressed a feeling that I didn't know that I had, or I didn't have the words for. Or with my last book, The Giant on the Skyline, somebody wrote me a beautiful letter saying, you expressed a longing I've had since I was 3 years old, but I haven't really, really been able to understand. And it's to do with homesickness and a longing for childhood. And I suppose this is art, really, isn't it? Is trying to find that other realm and trying to take yourself into that place where you're not just saying I'm sad or I'm upset or I'm homesick or I'm depressed, but you are really moving into that place as you then write about it. So you're actually feeling it again. And it's what makes writing scary and exciting and sometimes like slightly perilous, is because you actually have to take yourself back there, as it were. And yeah, it's an other worldly place. And that's why writing takes such a long time, because you can't just like, all right, I'm just going to start doing it straight away. I think you have to create the opportunities to just start doing it straight away. So if you're taking your writing really seriously, you have to sit down and be there with the work and be present to the work. And often when you are doing that, nothing is happening. You're sitting there thinking, this isn't very good. I don't know what to write. I'm like rubbish at this. I'm bored. I want to go and do something else. I'm not worthy to write this. Who on earth is going to be interested in me? So you have to have all of those feelings, and you have to stay with it and stay with it. And I think that writing is often about being able to withstand that discomfort. In a way, it's a bit like meditation. Meditation is uncomfortable, isn't it? It's something that you have to almost go into a trance state or another state to be in. And sometimes I think that writing is a bit like that. You're trying to access that other space.
I think it's definitely a spiritual practice of meeting yourself again and again, and even in that places of, like you say, like, is this interesting, or who am I to write this? And just knowing that turning up is enough. And I think that's what links. I know I'm writing a book at the minute, and I know for a fact that I wouldn't be able to write it if I hadn't have also had my meditation and my yoga practice, because I would have crumbled as soon as those thoughts started coming. But because I've had my yoga and my meditation practice, I'm able to say, oh, no, I recognize these. I can keep going with this.
That's so interesting. And do you find yourself going into that place quite often, the place of discomfort, self-doubt, boredom, frustration, quite often?
Well, it's why I asked the question of where do you get your audacity from? It feels so audacious, and I think as someone who's been socialized the way I have in the northeast of England as a woman, to put a pen on a paper and make a mark and say, this is what I think, this is what I feel, is almost so decadent in a way that is like, it feels not immoral, but like it. Who am I to do this? Yeah. And to just turn around and say, no, I am allowed.
Mm. And whether that work is going to be published, whether you want to put it into a public place, whether you want to write a book, whether you want to put it onto social media, Substack, the very act of actually sitting down and saying, this is what I'm feeling, and this is how it feels. And even if it is I really love the sense of the communication, the communion with other people. But even if that communication is purely with yourself, the value of that is so intense, isn't it? The audacity also probably comes from, just talking about this made me think about more deeply, it probably comes from the practice of it as well. You know, the more that you do it, the more that you feel a kind of power and ability within yourself. And I teach memoir writing, and a lot of this thing that I teach, I do these day writing retreats, is an exercise around shame. I enable and allow people to shed that sense of shame and fear for some moments while they're writing something. And it is absolutely wonderful seeing people arriving for the start of the day thinking, oh, I'm not really sure I'm a writer, and leaving feeling, this is my story. Whether I want to write about it in a public way or not, this is my story, this is what my voice is, and this is why it matters, and this is why, what I'm going to say. And I really, really love that process, actually, that part of being a writer, that sort of teaching that I do is really important to me, is helping other people to have some of that audacity. As I like the word audacity, it's a good word.
One of the things that I find so remarkable about your writing is that on one level, it could be seen as being very self-turned, but it's also incredibly generous. I feel like your writing is very, very generous. I remember when I read The Wild Other and your descriptions of your childhood, even though it is couldn't be, I lived on a council estate in Newcastle. It was a completely different upbringing, but you tapped into a almost collective feeling of childhood, and this feeling of it was like a Narnia Enid Blyton, but also so to you. It was like this communal idea of childhood, but at the same time, it was incredibly personal and only your experience. So it was, you managed to weave this incredible duality of this is for everyone and also this is just for me.
Definitely. And that's really, really, really important to me in my writing, is that idea that the thing that I am experiencing, the circumstances of our lives might be different, but the thing that I'm experiencing is, and this is where we started from in this conversation, is the feeling is similar. The feeling is the same. The feeling is shared between us. And I don't really like reading I'm writing my 5th memoir. I don't really call them memoirs now, because I often think of memoirs as stories, books about people who've done something big and extraordinary and some incredible journey or some terrible thing that they've overcome, or coming from some glittering family or whatever. And I'm not really interested in that kind of writing. I'm not at all interested in fame, celebrity, somebody's background. What I'm interested in is them as a human being, and the feelings that we all go through in the course of a normal day. And one of the reasons I wrote the book about motherhood was because My Wild and Sleepless Nights, because the book that came before that was The Wild Other, where I had written in that book about fairly extreme travel and adventure, the rodeos, for example. And people said, "Oh, you're really brave." And when that book came out, I had a newborn baby, an adolescent son who was getting into, a lot of adolescent trouble. And I thought, going off and traveling the world and having those adventures as a younger woman, that wasn't brave. Sitting in a room with a toddler and a baby, and being a parent with generosity and dealing with motherhood, that's brave. Like a day with children at home, that is real bravery. And I wanted to really convey that feeling of the sort of challenges and without leaving the house, that you can go through the most huge challenges, the huge highs and bleak lows, and you don't have to have actually gone anywhere at all. You can just have got through a single day. So, and I find that the more personally that I write, the more about my own specific experiences, the more that I can show people the inside of my life, not in a generalized way, but specifically about me, the more other people see their own experiences there. And I love that feeling that and what you've just said is just so heartwarming to me, that we might have had these different childhoods, ostensibly different, but the actual feeling of childhood was something the same. And that's so beautiful. I love it.
Do you think that you're a people person? Are you interested in people? Are you the type of person who, if you're sat next to someone at a party, you end up talking about what they think happens after death, rather than like what their job is?
Definitely. I am absolutely fascinated by human beings and normal human beings, and what makes us tick, and what makes us, what we think about exactly. What happens when you die? Why did your marriage fail? Why did you decide to have children? Why did you decide not to have children? Why did you do that job? Why did you go and live abroad? Why did you fall out with your mother? Why do you prefer your brother to your sister? Like all of those questions, which I've just, pulled out of anywhere, I am really, really interested by. And I'd love to know about your daily routine and what happens in your daily life, because what you cook, I'm fascinated by what people cook for supper, for example, and what time they go to bed. I love that, the sort of minutiae of what makes us up, because our days, and this is why the time we spend on social media is so dangerous, isn't it? Because you think, oh, it's just like, I'm just going to quickly pick up my phone, have a quick scroll. And then you realize you've spent, days and days and days and years doing that. The stuff that we do every day might appear mundane, but it is actually who we are. And it's been interesting living in America, because I've actually found it quite hard sometimes to, and I don't know if that's this city, but like I actually find people more forthcoming in England generally than in America, where there is a sort of civility and an apparent openness, but a slightly more fear of, I think, showing our vulnerabilities to one another. I think in Britain, women, when I think about my relationships, my female relationships, they're incredibly intimate. We know all about each other's lives, everything. And I think that's a really beautiful and valuable and important part of British culture, actually, and our British kind of psyche. And we have a reputation for being cold or distant or frosty, but I don't think that's true at all. I don't think that's true at all.
So take me in the inside of your life a little bit and tell us what your morning routine looks like. What does it look like?
So I've got 5 children. My eldest 2 children are in their 20s, so they're not here now. But really, since they're over at university. But since I was 24, I've had children around, and then the demands of children and need to do lunch boxes and get them up and like pull them out of bed and get them to brush their teeth. And so there's always, my entire adult life, that's been going on. My youngest child is now 9. The youngest 3 are like 9, 11 and 13. So they're still very much in the sort of swirl of family life, but they don't actually need dressing. I don't actually have to like pull their, or sometimes I do occasionally have to still pull their socks on. One of them is a bit resistant to school, but I'm lucky. I think I'm lucky because I really, really enjoy waking up early. I say I'm lucky because, as most 50-year-old women can tell you, you don't get really much choice about whether you wake up early or not. You do just wake up early. And actually all the way through my 40s, I woke up pretty early and found it quite hard to go back to sleep. But I will often get up around about 5:15, 5:30, and there's usually a child sleeping in bed with me, and I'll leave. And my husband travels a lot as well, so I'm often on my own in the house. And I come down to this room where I'm talking to you from now, which is like the kitchen. And I've got my kitchen table here, which really, we actually bought the kitchen table from England. It's like my mum's kitchen table. All the big important things in my life have happened around this kitchen table. And when my husband said, when we moved to America, we have to take the kitchen table, I thought, don't be ridiculous. Like, we could just go to IKEA and just buy a table. We're not staying there. He said, no, we have to take the table. And I'm just like, it's the only big piece of furniture we bought, and I'm really pleased we did. So I sit here at this old, and the reason I'm talking about the table, because it's a heavily grained, it was a school table. It's got like compass marks and things like that on it. And there've been, everything that's happened in my life has happened around here. And I light some candles and I make a cup of tea. I have to have a cup of tea. I really like Lapsang Souchong tea, which is like smoky tasting. And I sit at this table and I will do some work for about an hour or an hour and a half. This time is especially precious to me because also the idea when my children were younger that I had silence, peace and a space to work and focus at this time in the morning, would have seemed just like outlandishly, outrageously privileged, because obviously like I had babies who'd been up and had toddlers and that very, very early morning thing of being up with your kids. Now my kids don't wake up early. So I get this period of time in the morning. And I like to keep all the lights quite low, and I've got tons of coloured fairy lights, so it looks like it's Christmas all year round. But I like to keep it and I keep the curtains closed. And I really love this feeling of being in my own space. There is some sense of urgency because it's, by 7 o'clock and I have to start getting everyone up and going. But I have got like an hour or an hour and a half where it's just mine and I can really focus. And sometimes I'll just do emails. Sometimes I'll do some writing. Sometimes I'll just scroll social media. Sometimes I'll look at the news. Sometimes I'll think about a really important email or something that needs, emotionally needs me to address it. But that is a really, really essential part of my day. And it really helps me when the kids then get up and I've got like an hour and a half of the usual kind of chaos of trying to get them to eat and do their lunches and so on. I know that I have had some time and space for myself where I have ideally done something creative. I don't think answering my emails is particularly creative, but certainly if I've managed to do, like this morning, I did some work on my new book. So by 9 o'clock comes, I've got the kids off to school, and I've had that feeling of setting something for the day. And the candles and the kitchen table and the tea are all a really important part of that. And then I walk from about 8:30 when I drop the kids at school to 9:30. I walk. I didn't do that when I first got to DC, and I got really quite depressed. And I was very lonely, and I was very confused, and I was very culture shocked about America and the difference in my life. I'd moved from rural England to, major capital city. And I have found that also an important part of for my mental health, but also of my creative process is movement and that walking. And I walk quite rapidly, and I have 2 dogs, so I walk with the 2 dogs. I actually love the fact that I'm walking on pavement, so it's like there's no mud, because in England I walk in the countryside because that's where I live, and it's more of a performance. You've got to, less in the summer, but in February you've got to get full mud gear on, as I'm especially right now through the winter that you've all been through. But I love the sort of that period of moving. Sometimes I will talk to people in England, like my dad or a friend, but I do feel as though that's an important part of the thinking process. There's no way that I could drop the kids at school and then go and sit down and start writing instantly. There has to be some kind of, like, I'm literally shaking as I say this to you, like creative shaking down of all the stuff that's going on. And that walking time, is really important. And then I will come home and I'll make myself a packed lunch, and I will go either to the library, or in the last month, I've actually rented this space in a co-working space to try and get more silence, actually. So that's kind of, and then the mid-morning, I might spend some time putting something on Substack, or a bit of faffing, a bit of necessary faffing goes on. But then I'm trying to write by sort of mid to late morning, and then through the afternoon, depending what the kids are doing after school. But that's my morning. And I sometimes I get up early and I go and lift some weights in the basement of my house, because I started doing that about 4 years ago in my mid-40s. When I don't do it, I actually find that I feel really stiff around my back and I feel really uncomfortable. And for a while I thought, is it the weights making me uncomfortable? Then I realized, no, it's actually, if I don't do it, I feel really, really deeply uncomfortable. So I think I have developed a greater awareness of my physiological needs, my body and my mind working together in my late 40s. Throughout your 20s and 30s, you can just do anything, and you can, I think about the way I kind of abused and used my body in my 20s and 30s, and you can get away with it. But then there is that profound change that happens in your 40s. Taking that sort of quite seriously and continuing to take it seriously, realizing that it's like, you can't just do some weights for last week and then not do it for another 3 weeks. It has to happen. A little bit has to happen all the time. And that is, again, it's part of, I'll often listen to a podcast. Is part of a physical process that sets me up for the emotional process of writing, creative process of writing.
And do you find that there's any rituals that you would take away from place? So something that you would have done, whether you were living in the UK or whether is there anything that's been a thread through all of the places that you do in the morning?
I think that the tea and the candles are a really, really important part of a ritual, definitely. I've never done anything like morning, I know a lot of people who do morning pages. I tried a bit when the children were small. When you've got small children and toddlers, they just touch everything all the time. But I think finding the time alone, and that's so hard when you've got young kids, and I'm really sympathetic to parents who might be listening to this and think, well, I don't get any time alone. I didn't get any time alone for many, many years around my small children. And it's hard. Like, it is just hard, period. It really, really is. And you kind of have to just get through it. it does change. But that the ritual would be that silent, almost like a safe space. I do feel very safe in that space. No one's going to make any demands of me. No one's going to ask anything of me. No one's going to trigger big emotional, like, I've got a child who's very explosive. He's not going to come in and explode on me about something like that. It's a kind of a really precious moment, which I now almost think of as a globe of light or something, which is just about me and preparing myself for the day. And I think that so many of us are lacking, that's what so many of us want, is a bit more time alone to be as well, isn't it? As women, particularly.
A question that I ask all of my guests: say you'd come to the end of your life and an angel or whatever you believe in said you can go back and you can live one morning again. And it doesn't have to be like the 17th of March 2001. It can be just like when this was. Which morning would you go back to?
Oh God, I mean, I would do anything for a morning in my teenage life at this kitchen table with my mum and my sister. Mum would probably be like, she often was cooking bacon for us, it was the 80s. She was like, and us in our school uniforms, like real nylon school uniforms, getting ready to go to school. And now my sister Nell, who'd probably like done something funny with her hair, permed it or something. And I remember when she was given Tiffany. The other day I was watching Stranger Things with my children, and there's obviously a lot of Kate Bush in that, but then this Tiffany song came on. I Think We're Alone Now. That song, which I remember Nell being given the single for that, and like her unbelievable joy and excitement about getting this Tiffany single. So I would do anything to be back there. But I also think of a day just a few months before my sister died, the last time she was at my house in 2019. We had no idea. She did have cancer, but we had no idea she was going to die so suddenly. And she was there, and she was brushing my son's hair with a funny brush that had been developed for people who were going through chemotherapy, and he was laughing. And I have some photos of it, and I'd do anything to be back there. And, I think about the moments that we have with one another. The moments are so important. And the day when she died, she was told that she had a day to live. Like, she had sudden liver failure and she had a day to live. And I've often thought about that now, thinking, a day, that's nothing. But then I've thought, imagine if I could have a whole day with Nell now. Imagine if we could have a whole day together. That's like, the most intense heart's desire that I can imagine. So make those days, make those hours, make those moments. I'm not saying you can't make every single moment count. Obviously, that's far too much pressure on all of us. Putting the phone down, coming off social media, being present with one another, making eye contact, having nice conversations, sharing a cup of tea, going for a little walk, giving somebody a bunch of daffodils. Those little things matter so much. So yeah, those two, am I allowed 2 mornings?
Of course, you can have as many. Yeah, you can have 2 moments, Clover. I was going to say you can have as many as you want, but we'll say 2.
Thank you.
That's so beautiful. This has been such a pleasure for me. I've absolutely adored spending this time with you, Clover. Thank you so much for your generosity and spending some time with us in the podcast today.
I've really loved it, Jo. It's been really, really, really special. It's been a really special conversation. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you for listening to Before the Work Begins podcast with me, Jo Hutton. Don't forget to like and subscribe so that you always get to hear the brand new episodes of this podcast. You can find me on Instagram at Jo Hutton Yoga and of course on Substack at Yoga for Tired People.